so we can you can get the introduction to Josh and maybe not run out of recording space. Josh is a native New Yorker who came to Baltimore to start a rock and roll band in 1997, back in the last century. And he said the band's claim to fame was composing a rock anthem for the city, which then Mayor Martin O'Malley went on record with the Baltimore Sun as he kind of liked it. With that effusive praise, in order to pay his bills, Josh started a small internet technology firm where he continues to work. More to the point for us, as the 100th anniversary of his neighborhood approached, in that subdivision on Canterbury and Cloverhill Roads, Josh appointed himself neighborhood historian, and amazingly, nobody seemed to object. And he's on a mission to document the lives of all the first families to live in those 88 houses in that neighborhood. And he will tell you more about that. He has a project, get this results on a YouTube channel, which has not yet gone live, I understand. But enough of Mike Franch. Here's what you've been waiting for. Please welcome Josh Cohen.
Thank you kindly. Can everyone hear me, or can someone hear me? Good. Normally, if I would be giving a talk in a place like the Village Learning Center, you could read the crowd. You're very small on my screen, so I'm just going to have to assume enthusiasm. And I'm going to feed off of that assumed enthusiasm. So, if at some point you say, why does this guy seem so happy? He's a little nuts. Well, there you go. That's what we're going to do. All right, I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. Hopefully you see nothing. Okay, great. That is, in fact. All right. Who lived in your house? Uncovering a history of a Baltimore neighborhood. A lot of the folks here will section of Tuscany-Canterbury just beyond the Johns Hopkins campus, where there are two streets. Now, this is the densest populated portion of Baltimore because you see all the high rises. There's the greatest number of people per capita. But perched there, hidden behind, are two streets, Cloverhill and Canterbury, that were all built as a development, unified development. And whenever I tell people, oh, I live on Cloverhill, and they say, oh, yeah, that cute neighborhood, that cute neighborhood. No one knows what it's called. In fact, most of the neighbors, actually, I will say this because no one here is going to object. I don't think any of the neighbors knew. It's possible that some, but in starting to dig into the history, I found out that this was built and marketed as university homes. And as we were coming upon our 100th year anniversary, I suckered in my neighbor Katie to help design some artwork. And she went and pulled some graphics, and there we have our centennial banner. What our centennial is, or when it falls, is a very controversial thing, but we'll get into that. So we are about to embark on a journey through a massive amount of information for such a small subdivision. It's, I think, 83 homes, actually. I think that the flyer went out incorrect. 83 row homes. I'm gonna sound like I'm on coke because I'm gonna move fast. And I doubt anyone's gonna retain all these facts, nor do I anticipate or hope that you retain all these facts. What I want to do is leave an impression that if you start pulling at a string at your laptop at home and you start looking into your neighborhood, you can potentially uncover real rich worlds that of the past who echo around you, right? The echoes of the past are around us, and we're just not aware of it until we tune into them, which sort of reminds me of something that a story she told me, Kenna, on Canterbury Street, that I think is apropos of this. Many years back when she moved into her house on Canterbury Street, she started decorating up in the 3rd floor and was pulling off the wallpaper and found a drawing of like a World War I soldier, a doughboy, and scribbled underneath the drawing was a quote that today I'm hanging wallpaper, but tomorrow I'm off to the Great War. And it's sort of amazing. You ask yourself, how many things like that are underneath our wallpaper? So we're going to start peeling off wallpaper. So for those of you who've not been to this area or from out-of-towners joining us in, we're going to do a virtual drive-by. Here we are on 39th Street approaching Cloverhill. Excuse me, there we go. Some of the houses, there are 3 houses that face 39th Street. But then as you turn in, you can see the orientation of the house changes, and then the row homes continue on. And they're groups of 2 or 3 homes, mostly 3, 4, I'm sorry, groups of 3 and 4. Here we're coming down our nice green street. You can see the high rises peeking in the back. That's my house, hidden by green. There are some number of stucco homes. There's one group of all stucco. There's another group of half stucco, half brick. Most of them are brick. There is one section of Tudor houses that are some of the earliest homes built there. Now we're going down Canterbury, where there's a little less tree cover, so you can see the homes better. And they vary in sizes. Some are slightly, which is quite a large house. And I will also say this, if I may say so myself, this is the nicest alley in Baltimore City. From the get-go, they buried the electrical, which is really nice because there are a lot of towns, or a lot of streets and alleys in the city where you walk around, there's just draped wires everywhere. And of course, we have 100-year-old ginkgos. You see the ginkgo here, up and down the whole alley. And a view from my treehouse, I should say deck. At some point, decks became popular and everyone has them. And here are the kids having some frozen mango, and we can see the Tudor house in the back. And this is a photo of my house on its 100th birthday last year, April 1st, 2019. Okay, so let's jump into the nitty-gritty. When we bought the house several years ago, 2012 or thereabouts, we couldn't move in right away. The current owner was, she was getting her condo decorated or something like that. We had several months before we could move in. So we wanted to do more around the house. We would, walk around the neighborhood. We were in Charles Village, so it wasn't a big walk. Came from Charles Village, we'd go to La Familia to have dinner and then walk through the alley. And at some point I said, this is silly. There's only so many times I can have Italian food per week. So I had to make a connection with the neighborhood. So I said, I'm going to learn about this. I'm going to dig in and find out who owned this home in the past. So let's talk a little bit about tracing deeds. Many of you out there may have already done this process, so I apologize. For those who haven't, in Baltimore, it's super easy because everything's been digitized. It's wonderful. You can do 2 sites. You can go to the SDAT website. You see the URL up there. Or you can go straight to Maryland Land Rec, which we'll see as well. But you go in, say, and you type in your number. I scribbled this out because I wasn't sure where visually this would end up. I have no qualms about saying that I'm at 3914 Cloverhill. So once you punch that in, it pulls up information about the current owners, some information about the house, but most importantly, a reference to the deed, the deed of the house that you've purchased, right? And that's in a Liber folio form. Liber meaning book, folio meaning page. And so we can see it up there, 14 something or another. Okay, so then we jump over to Maryland Land Rec and punch in that we want to look at Liber 1447 page 347, 397, hit go. And bam, we've got our deed of assignment. Indeed, 2012, where Elaine Logan sold the house to Joshua Cohen and Laura Grant. Now you go down towards the bottom and you get a really arcane description of the house. It's so many feet from this corner, this street, so many feet from that corner. Of course, we didn't have GPS at the time, and this was probably the best way to describe, or it was the best way to describe your house. Although I will say, I have gone out there with one of those wheels that measures feet, and I tried to recreate this, and I always end up in someone else's house. So, you know, at some point we were doing some work on the deck, and they said, "Oh, you're going to have to get someone to come in and, you know, do your house." It escapes me, you know, the layout or whatever. But they can't do it. They can't recreate it. But what's important here is on all of these is what you'll see is at the bottom is being the same property that was sold in 1987 from Florence Tyler to Elaine Logan in this Liber, this folio. So then you go back, you punch that in, and we have a transfer. We can see that this was Tyler selling to Elaine Logan. Go down to the bottom, and we see this is the same ground of land that was sold in 1978. So from husband Tyler to, I guess, estranged or divorced wife Tyler. And we're back to that 1967 transfer, and this references one in back to 67, Latrobe Cogswell to the Furlongs. We keep going back. We're back in 1946, James Steele. Let's keep going. We're Rita K. Douglas to James Steele back in wherever this is, 1946, I'm sorry. Yes, and now we're back in 1935 where Margaret Percy has sold it to Rita K. Douglas. Let's keep going. Now we have Malcolm Douglas to Margaret Percy. Wait a second. Rita to James, Margaret to Rita, Douglas and Rita to Margaret. Something weird has happened here. Someone sold the house to someone and bought it back. What is this? Well, again, you're a good group of historians here. You'll know that this was the creation of ground rent. This was a home that did not have ground rent. And this Margaret Percy character came around and said, I got a deal for you. You sell me your house, I'll sell you back the two parts of your house. So that we could separate the ground from the house and start charging rent to the future owners, which is exactly what happened. At first, I didn't get it. And I was tracing deeds and looking historic newspapers to figure out who Margaret Percy was. And then I noticed she was everywhere. Anyway, that brings us back to the very first deed of this home. You can see now the typewriter has not yet been invented. We're in April 1st, 1919. Well, at least it's not invented, not in wide use in Baltimore at that time. So University Homes has deeded this to Malcolm T. Douglas. And I go from here. Who's Malcolm Douglas? Who's Rita K. Douglas? Well, we got to go to the Facebook equivalent from the past century, the social papers. Well, the Sun papers, and look at the social pages. So when I first started doing this, you know, I was a hack. I'm still a hack, but I was not a hack worthy of, I wasn't willing to pay any money for this. So I got my library card, and via the Enoch Pratt Library website, you can get into the databases and start looking at the Baltimore Sun historical archives. I've since discovered newspapers.com, which is really nice because you can search multiple states at once and see smaller papers such as the Poughkeepsie Journal, where I find myself in 1973 on the front page eating a marshmallow. So it has its value. Anyway, let's go ahead and search in ProQuest, Baltimore Sun Archives, for Malcolm T. Douglas. We've got a bunch of hits already, but this one looks good. You see here at the bottom, Bride of Malcolm Douglas, Rita Hammond Kelly. Well, we know that. We know that from the deeds, that this is the couple, and it's a wedding. Weddings and wedding announcements, marriages, and obituaries are the holy grail for tracing people, because you get this sort of thing. Miss Rita Hammond Kelly, daughter of Mrs. I.M. Kelly to Malcolm Townsend Douglas, son of Mr. and Mrs. James Malcolm Douglas, took place here, etc., etc. So you've got an immense amount of information about these folks. And I, along the way, found the real estate note of University Homes selling my house, 3914, to Malcolm Douglas. But let's keep going looking for Malcolm Douglas's. So we find here an article about Marylanders visiting the Maryland Pavilion at the St. Louis Fair in 1904. And I cut out a little bit on the right-hand side. On the bottom, you'll see that from Rossville, there's a J.M. Douglas, Walter Townsend. There's a bunch of folks, and a Malcolm T. Douglas. Now, I'd love to say, yeah, that's my Malcolm, but that would be extremely presumptuous because there could be other Malcolms. Now, Malcolm T. Douglas seems sort of a special name, but if you Google Joshua Cohen, for example, my Lord, I'm all over the place, and I at one point was, the mayor of Annapolis, so you're not finding me very easily. And so let's go under the assumption that we can't assume anything. But we have feelings here because J.M. Douglas could be that James Malcolm Douglas from the wedding announcement. So let's keep going. I'll tell you, my house was one of the easier ones. When I'll talk about this process became insane once I decided I want to do all 83 homes in the neighborhood. But I lucked out. I didn't get discouraged because it wasn't that bad. Malcolm Townsend Douglas, we have this history of Baltimore, Maryland from its founding, and there are some biographical notes here about Walter Robey Townsend, and we can see that his sister, Elizabeth T. Douglas, is the wife of James, and who is a prominent engineer, and they have a child, Malcolm Townsend Douglas, and they live in Rossville, Baltimore County. Well, I think we have 100% confidence here that this is our Malcolm Douglas from Rossville. Well, now that we can say, all right, Malcolm Douglas from Rossville, what were you doing a while ago? Oh, by the way, this was the relative that was profiled, Walter Robey Townsend, which Townsend is a fairly important family in this state, and he was a state senator. And you see some references here as well to Malcolm T. Douglas living in the Old Hold on Sunnyside, which we may talk about later. But we start combing around. Here we get a great article from 1897 that says 5-year-old Malcolm Douglas has been bit by a dog and had to be taken to a hospital. My Lord. We're all leaving trail. Well, not all of us. I am not active in social networks. Of course, I don't know what anyone's doing, but a lot of us are leaving our digital trails, much as Malcolm and his family were leaving their analog trails years ago. This one's very interesting. Malcolm T. Douglas of Rossville, ours, has done his entrance exams, and he's off to the University of Virginia. Well, it's time to start looking in Virginia. In fact, it's time to start looking for some yearbooks. And we have here the 1912 edition of Corks and Curls, and look at the very bottom, Malcolm Douglas, who is in Hotfoot, whatever that may be, is Eli Banana, and he's on the baseball team and studying law. This is getting interesting. And here he is on the baseball team, Malcolm Douglas playing shortstop. Are you ready for it? Turn the page. Oh my goodness. It's the 1912 baseball team. Ladies and gentlemen, the first owner of 3914 Cloverhill, Malcolm Douglas. There next to the captain. So now we can keep going in. What was this baseball player up to? Well, for a while, he took over the team as team captain when the captain was away for a while. And everyone was hot over Douglas. He was getting offers from professional teams, including the Washington Senators, and the Baltimore Orioles wanted him, but Douglas was not yet ready for that. Here he is turning down the Orioles and turning down the New York Giants. Yes, everyone, and here he is in the paper again, him and another fella, turning down more offers to join the majors. And you can see here that at one point he was offered $500 to play for the Boston Nationals, $500 a month, and even more to the New York Giants, an undisclosed amount. $500 today would be like $13,000 a month. It's hard to go inflation that over that many years, but $13,000 a month is nothing to sneer at, and I'm sure was good pay. Now, if you look at, I've highlighted some text here, ball yet. As I will later find out, they never wanted him to play professional ball. All right, that's where we had to go to Ancestry.com. I was starting with open source tools and doing a lot of this, but I said, you know what? I can only hold 3 facts in my mind at once. I need something that's going to help me organize. And Ancestry is pretty darn neat. So we start looking up for Malcolm Douglas. We know he was born in 1892 in Rossville, and we start finding him in the census They start finding him in a whole bunch of places. Here he is at 3914 in the year 1920. And we see the household also had Rita, also known as Loretto, and Elizabeth, the daughter of just 3 years old. And from the Polk directory, the business directories in town, we can see that, in fact, he went into business with his dad, Douglas and Sons, and went into real estate. So the majors didn't get him. It wasn't a respectable profession, and went into real estate. We've got his, you can see by then he was working with his dad at the Muncie building downtown. And we start building an extensive family tree to see where is he connected. Once you can do this, when you know someone's birth and death and you know where they're related to, you know who this person is. Now we have to start looking at Rita's family. Independence Kelly, we have an obituary. Independence Kelly died, and there we get his relation to Father Caleb and daughter Miss Rita Hammond Kelly, etc. We're in business. We can start building a family tree for Rita Hammond Kelly, who's in the black area on the right. And again, looking at the Facebook, am I being heard okay? Am I not distorting? All well? Yes, good. I'll keep going. Like I said, I'm going to assume enthusiasm. So here we are looking at more tidbits. That would be interesting that Hammond Kelly, Mrs. Independence Kelly has taken a couple of the girls to the Pan American Exposition up there in Buffalo. And we see that the Kellys would vacation or summer in Catonsville to get out of the big city. For those not from Baltimore, Catonsville is spitting distance from Baltimore. So to think that you would summer there is, well, different. Okay. So we've got lots of data points. Once you have this many data points in Ancestry, you can find other Ancestry members that have mapped the same person in their trees. And you can see it pops up with hints, right? Here we have some hints. That's what those green leaves mean. That Malcolm Douglas, we have a school yearbook photo down there. That's the one I showed you earlier. And we have Ancestry members or another hint. So then we look at Ancestry members, and now you can start contacting these folks if they want to. Some folks, I found a lot of the people in Ancestry, they're into this. They're hardcore about tracing families. And when you ping them and say, I'm interested in your family, they're all for it. You know, in the modern era, you know, while modern communications have allowed us to communicate with a lot of people easily, it also can be a bit frightening, and some people get a little standoffish if you reach out to them and they don't know who you are. But I found that, generally speaking, Ancestry members have been open. Now, I happened to find Malcolm and Rita's grandson, Patrick Miller, working in Towson, doing some Googling, and he was working up there and was actually able to contact him that way. So once I had contacted the grandkids of the Douglases, they started giving me a treasure trove of information. So now we have Rita and Elizabeth, baby Elizabeth. This is the first baby of 3914 Cloverhill and the first homeowner wife. And we get Elizabeth through the ages as a teenager, getting married to Douglas Miller. I'm sorry, J.B. Miller. And then we've got a more recent photo. This is when Elizabeth, the baby there, the 3-year-old, was still alive. She's since passed away. But this is at age 92, and we have left to right Patrick Miller, Susan Miller Phillips, and Michael Miller. So Michael and family owned a company here in Baltimore called Graymar Business Equipment. So in talking with Michael, who was the family historian, he said, you know, there was really little known about what became of Malcolm after the divorce, because what we found in looking through this is some point in the 1930s, probably by 1935, Malcolm and Rita divorced. Now, I could also find from the census that he had become a stockbroker, and I can only speculate, pure speculation, that in 1930 as a stockbroker, things probably got pretty rough and could possibly lead to tensions in the household that could lead to a divorce. We don't know. But we do find here that by the World War II, he was registered as living in Eager Street and working on Key Highway for the Atlantic Refining Company. And Michael said, you know, he didn't really know much about his grandfather until he was in a assisted living facility, and then his mom would take him there, and he got to know him. Although, again, you know, looking through the papers, you find some great information. Here in 1950, we see Malcolm Douglas working as the manager of a gas station. That's what it must have been, Arco, and foiling a holdup, thwarting a robbery. You know, it's interesting. Here's his obituary. Michael told me that he remembers visiting Malcolm Douglas here at this facility that's since gone out of business, and that he remembers when he was baseball, and that he did confirm that, in fact, that he chose not to go into a career in baseball due to pressure from his mom. All right, so we've learned an amazing amount of Malcolm T. Douglas, and I'm sharing only a fraction of it. This was amazing that this is all there. So I said to myself, okay, let's get some context. What was the neighborhood like when Malcolm was living in, when Rita was living in, when Elizabeth was there? So let's take a look at University Homes. This is a map. I'm not exactly sure when. I think it's like 1904, thereabouts. What you'll notice here is Charles Street and what is now University, right? And this area here in the middle is where our Cloverhill and Canterbury's are. But at the time, they were large estates with the house facing Charles Street. So there was really little left to build on by the time Hopkins came in and had been fully moved in by 1914 or thereabouts. And you had Guilford already established over here onto the right-hand side. There was not much to be had for new housing. So where do we go from here? Well, the book of record for us folks who live in Tuscany-Canterbury is Tuscany-Canterbury by Eileen Hyam. It's a wonderful book. It has amazing photos, and it has some good information about university homes. So what I said, and information about George Morris, of course. I said, okay, I'm going to take this convoluted strategy, this combination of ancestry and newspapers, and just use that on everything. Like, you know, if you're a hammer, everything you see is a nail. Well, this is what I did. So I started tracing George Morris, and lo and behold, that led me to his granddaughter, Joanne Smith, who lives in Pennsylvania, and her site had great information. She provided with more information. This is George R. Morris in the center at Syracuse University, studying architecture. There we are. Guy in the middle. His father was a carpenter builder, but not a big builder. And George didn't have the means to go to college until a buddy of his was back from Syracuse and said, no, you don't need money. Go there, start working, and you'll pay your way through. And that's what he did. He started by doing odd jobs and, you know, fixing things. And then he figured out that he could get other students to fix things, and he would just organize the student fixers and started a business, sort of a construction business while in school. We know all this. He came then after the Great Fire of 1904 in Baltimore. He spent the night at the YMCA building here, which he later purchased for his George Morris World headquarters. I know these stories because his granddaughter gave me this great article from 1925 Success Magazine, which goes all into it. So Morris primarily built apartment buildings when he started, but at some point he came upon the idea for university homes. And here we can see a snippet from January 3rd, 1917, where University Homes, a recently organized corporation, was buying land from George W. Hyde. So you saw that there were those big plot of lands. So he started buying up the back lots. And here we see the deed of George Hyde selling to University Homes. He went and bought the back lots from the Carter family. And then we've got April 6th, he got the first permits to build 21 units. And he was estimating this was going to cost him about $126,000. And he started buying up more lots of land. By April, he was buying land from the Dukers, which I think brings us up to Highfield. And so he's bought everything he can buy. And then by August, ostensibly the first units were completed. Now, this is very interesting because they say they sold the first quarter dwelling for $11,000. Exactly sure what's going on there. But you notice this note: the houses are being built on a community plan and will be all heated automatically by electricity. Well, the very next day in the Baltimore Sun, the Consolidated Gas and Electric Light and Power Company took issue with this. And would you kindly make the houses will be heated with gas-fired steam boilers? Kindly make the correction. E.D. Miller. Well, we're going to come back to that story because it is, in fact, a claim to fame that this was the first neighborhood that was completely heated by gas. But let's just go through our trajectory. Here we see that Morris was able to get Mayor Preston to change the name of Oak Street to Canterbury, give it a more sophisticated name. And we're in business and we are advertising the homes. University homes of striking beauty, distinctive character, all the conveniences of apartment life retained. Fireproof garages, gas-fired steam boilers, no coal or ashes, a Kerner incinerator, no garbage cans. I mean, this sounds wonderful, doesn't it? And we see, please fill out this send me a free booklet. Ooh, what do you mean booklet? That's something we're going to need to figure out. And we've got photos in the Baltimore Sun up at top there of University Homes. And then what's this? University Homes Ideally Furnished Home, 3935 Canterbury. And what you get here is they have filled up this house with $52,000 of furnishings from all sorts of vendors. Come and see the ideally furnished home. $52,000 in 1921 is $1.15 million today. And everyone wants to get around the cachet of the ideally furnished home. Blumenthal and Kahn Electric Company, which provided electrical services for the university homes, they're very proud to tell you with this very large ad that they are in university homes. Well, on that tip from Eileen Hyam's book, I went to, I finally left the house. I have kids. I do this research from my couch. I was pandemic before there was pandemic. And when you have kids, it's unless you're out with them, right? But it's spending my evenings, but there comes a time where you actually have to leave. And I went to the Enoch Pratt, where they had a great collection of the Baltimore Gas and Electric News, and found this issue from 1929 showing Cloverhill Road, saying all these houses are heated by gas. Remember that lovely green setting when we were heading down? Now, granted, it's the winter, but look at the size of the trees at this point. And, ooh, this is a nice tidbit. The first group of large homes ever heated by manufactured gas. And we have a drawing of the neighborhood. Pretty cool. And I'm flipping around and I'm finding other articles about gas heating. I'm looking at this, typical gas heating unit from 1920. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's pretty nice. I should make note of that. And I'm looking at Eugene Milner. I know that name. Wait a second, that's that guy who was really pissed off when they said that these were heated by coal. The Consolidated Gas guy. We got to figure out who this guy is. And you start digging around and you find him writing in American Gas Engineering Journal. In November of 1917, before the first deed for our homes, he's talking about the future of gas-heated homes in America. And what? That's our neighborhood. Oh, that drawing is going out before things are finished. This is the artist's rendering of what things are going to look like. And here you say that there is a... in a development that is probably the largest gas-heated layout in the country, university homes. Undoubtedly, other progressive builders are watching the sale of these houses, and they're gonna keep their eye on Morris. Well, this was pretty cool. And I'll note that Michael Miller, grandson of Malcolm T. Douglas of 3914, told me that when his grandfather was working at the Muncie building, that he first learned of university homes because Baltimore Gas and Electric, or Consolidated Gas and Electric at the time, had a showroom on his way to work in the Muncie building, but on the ground floor, and they were advertising the neighborhood. So there you have it. There was a lot of co-marketing going on. All right. Now, I need to pause here and pay homage to the Google Books Initiative. Launched in 2004, Google started grabbing books and scanning them and putting optical character recognition into it. And they went around universities and got these obscure collections. And thanks to them, we have things like the National Real Estate Review from 1921, which wrote an article about the neighborhood and how it was being sold and strategically that this was to compete with apartments by getting rid of garbage cans, by having incinerators, by having gas heat, etc. And they had wonderful pictures of the neighborhood. I'm going to flip by these quickly. We'll see more of these. Like, oh my goodness, this is great. And our alley, you remember that one that looks like it's, in the Amazon? There's our alley. And Real Estate Review in 1922 did another article about how they marketed the house, how they brought in 28,000 visitors for the ideally furnished home. You remember that whole thing? What they did was they got vendors to furnish the home. They didn't do it like a museum. They didn't rope things off. They made it like people live there. And then you got a booklet as you came into the house and you could see what that home would look like. And then you could say, hey, I want to buy that item. And we had great photos, including I blew up this 1921 or 22 kitchen, which includes a dishwasher, that round tub thing sitting there by the sink. You can see the kernerator, or maybe not really well, the kernerator incinerator door as well. And everyone wants to, again, associate themselves with the ideally furnished home. Here we have the kernerator company saying, wouldn't you love to have 28,000 prospects? Here's my kernerator in the basement. And I know you guys are going to like this. This is what's in my kernerator. When I get the time, I'm going to sift through that. I'm sure it's a treasure trove. Anyway, now we're on to building age, 1922. Oh, an overhead shot of the neighbor. A real photo now, not just a rendering. Look at that. The house is in 1922. It's beautiful. And we have floor plans. And isn't that phenomenal? And we have what appears to be some sort of Model T. Because these had garages and heated garages and fireproof garages. And to this day, we turned it in, a prior owner turned it into like a romper room or whatever. But it's concrete ceilings and there is a radiator on the ceiling to heat you in your car. Building age 1922, attracting the crowd. These are the same photos, the same articles about how to bring people in to see. Morris was sort of, he had a lot of good ideas and he pushed them hard. So then I start looking at the Maryland State Archives because sometimes some things aren't on the internet, right? So I'm looking here at this Charles F. Steffley real estate collection. He's got a brochure about university homes. I'm like, whoa, what's that? This is worth leaving town for. So I head over to Annapolis, and there is his scrapbook, and look up in the right-hand corner is the first brochure to sell the neighborhood. And we have lovely photos and information about wouldn't it be lovely to live on this neighborhood and the Tudor houses and a charming colonial stairway decorated. And I'm starting to recognize these photos as all the photos that ended up in the national magazines. And we have sun porches, which to this day, there are many people that still have them, although a lot of us have decks now because it became a thing to have decks. And some people, our sun porch is sort of bumped out and a little larger. And once again, here we have a great close-up of Baltimore's nicest alley in 1921. I don't know if it was the nicest alley back then. Remember, this is what it looks like today. All right, cedar closets, immaculate bathrooms, and that's that heating unit that I found in the Milner brochure. And this is the Kernerator garbage chute, which I'd like to turn our garbage incinerator into a pizza oven, but I don't know if Laura will let me. And this is really neat, a fireless gas cooking range that came with the house. Fireless. What does fireless mean? This deserves more Googling. And lo and behold, I can't believe it. I found this on Etsy. This is a brochure about the Chambers fireless oven. And I'm flipping through it. I'm like, oh, this has got multiple pages. That's more or less our unit. But wait a second, what's that on the right-hand corner? What's on the right-hand side? It's our neighborhood again. Good Lord, our neighborhood was everywhere around the country. These are 2 streets. What is going on? And I'm scratching my head and I'm thinking, well, this has got to be somewhere else. Well, let's look at Kernerator's brochure. This, by the way, the Kernerator brochure is 42 pages. This is a good amount of bedtime reading. And here you can see this woman is working and throwing stuff into her basement to be burned. And we're flipping through, and what is on the very last page? But my Lord, another picture of our neighborhood. So this was making the rounds, and these vendors were getting good contracts, right? These maybe were novel contracts. We're putting a Kernerator in every one. We want some co-marketing. We're putting a gas range in every one. I don't know. If it kind of went both ways, but you can see the University Homes, a beautiful subdivision in Baltimore, and there is a Kernerator in every basement. All right. So in talking with Joanne Smith, George Morris's granddaughter, I was communicating with her. And I said, do you have any photos of when the neighborhood was being built? You know, just give me some ideas here. And she says, no, I don't have that, but I've got this booklet. It's called The Ideally Furnished Home. It's mostly advertisements. I'm like, you gotta be kidding. Ladies and gentlemen, The Ideally Furnished Home. It is full of every single item of every vendor in Baltimore City, going through room by room. So here in the garage, there's a Packard motor car and a Black & Decker air compressor, because that's what every family needed in 1920, was an air compressor in the basement. And we're going through the servants' quarters, and you start looking through all these, and you say, my Lord, no wonder how they got up to $1.2 million. There's just like silver and wonderful things and advertisements. And make mental note of this, which I don't expect you'll retain. Here's the Hudson Cement and Supply Company that provided all the bricks and lumber. And we have the Charles T. King Company that did all the heating and plumbing. And I'm not going to go through all these, but I wanted to show you how long this is. It's a wonderful document. So any one of us out there who live in one of these homes and want to recreate it the way it was, well, I've got some information that you can do. Now, we have a ton of information about the origins of the neighborhood, how it was sold. We know about Malcolm and Rita Douglas, and we've got a methodology. Can we apply this to all 83 homeowners? You sure can. But I will say this, tracing individual deeds is cumbersome. You often get to a point where something's illegible and you can't go anymore. Or there's ground rent and it sends you in the wrong direction. The block book. The block books would list all the transactions for a particular block or subdivision. So we're here in block 3695. So it was really easy. Start in 1917, start going down and look at each one. Now you'll notice here, you've got these archaic measurements. It doesn't say 3914 Cloverhill. It says so many feet from 39th Street, so many feet from whatever. Well, it doesn't matter because we have the Liber Folio, we have the deed references there. We just need to go through each of these. And as we go through them, we start to see the progression of how the houses were sold. What we have here is a Google Earth sort of representation of the neighborhood. And I'm going to show you and progress through time as they were sold. 1917, they sold the end units. 1918, the next chunk. They didn't necessarily, I know, in fact, they did not complete all the buildings right away because we were in the middle of World War I. There were shortages. There were also other issues that slowed down production. But my best guess is by 2021 it was completed because we saw that 1922 photo from overhead that it was completed. But anyway, 1918, 1919, 1920, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, and some straggler in 26. I don't really understand why it took that long, but I know there was no other homeowner. I mean, we got to the deed, you trace the deed back, the prior deed then referenced pure land, right? Buying from the Dukers, etc. All right, once you do it, lo and behold, we have now a list of every first homeowner from University Homes. This is 3 pages of this. We've got purchaser number 1, purchaser number 2, their birth, their death, their age at purchase, their occupation. I'm going to say that out of the 83, there are only 3 mysteries to me. One was Helen Orm West Nesmith, who never lived there. She was in New York, so it was sort of some sort of investment property. And so I couldn't figure it out. Another was 2 Carols that are, well, we'll see them, that I don't know. It's just impossible. And one Laura Cooper, which I think I know, and we'll look at her. But let's move on. I will make one sort of basic comment here. It was doing this from my house at night after the kids are in bed. It's a lot easier to trace the men. It's easier to trace the men because you can find professions, find them in professional journals, you find them in newspapers. The women are often in the newspapers for marriages and things like that. But to really figure out who these women are, I really would have to visit the churches and check archival information at churches to see what sort of social organizations they might be in, etc. Because there were not many professional women in the neighborhood. There were some, and I got some great information from them. So sort of that caveat there that there's only so far you can go. But this was a relatively wealthy neighborhood. It's going to be easier to find these folks. There's no doubt about it that there were institutional things helping me along. Page 2, we're going through Cloverhill, and you can see we've got chemists, head physician for the electrical company, people in fire insurance, bankers, pharmacists. You get a lot of presidents of a soap company, treasurer of a tin company, pediatricians, a machine shop owner. What do we get from the other pages? Head of the Star Shirt Company. So a lot of business people, a lot of brokers, that sort of thing. All right, we are at 40 minutes. I know I need to wrap this up soonish. I'm gonna fly through some of this, but I feel I want to highlight some of these folks. I can't get into all their histories. I could spend ages on it, and that's why you'll have to come to my YouTube channel. But I wanted to at least put up the ones that so far I've found photos for, because that's sort of the holy grail once you find photo. There's Albert Fennis, one of the first homeowners, who was a newspaper man from Kansas City who came here and then worked for the manufacturer's record for 30 years. And he received a letter from President Coolidge congratulating him on his 70th birthday. We have the Casslers, who were business folks, Improvement Association. Then they moved up to Peabody Heights. We talked about Charles Village previously. What used to be called Peabody Heights. He was on the Peabody Heights Improvement Association, and then moved on. We have, pardon me, Albert Fennis and Claudia Love. We've got William Cassler and his wife Catherine, and Gladys Mackenzie Cassler, the daughter on the right. The deed was in her name, which made this very hard. I had to crack this by finding them in the Blue Book. We have Paul Clark and Anna Inez Quast. Paul Clark was a insurance agent for the John Hancock Company. He went on to, in fact, become the head of the John Hancock Company. George Hilbert, president of Baltimore Optical, in communication with his granddaughter. And here you see some photos of the kids standing outside of the house in the 20s. It says, my dad, George Hilbert, had been born about 10 months before they bought that house. I do remember seeing pictures of the house. I don't know if I've seen a picture of that wonder-looking home, but I have lived in Baltimore on and off. I know that Edna, the wife, died in 1920 from flu, and my dad was only 3 years old. A few years later, my grandfather and my dad moved up to Ruxton, Maryland, and my grandfather died in a car crash in Florida in 1937. So I never met any of my grandfolks. This is a wonderful family, the Gales. And again, I'm going to take the liberty of reading from an email from Leslie Lewis, the oldest grandchild of the Gales. It says, George Gale was a professional mechanical engineer educated in Baltimore and Germany with degrees from Hopkins and Cornell. Never see him on the lacrosse team. He was captain. Although he worked for large companies at the time, his real love was being an independent consultant and inventor. He had a large library of technical books that fascinated me. Books on steam engines, the earliest days of aviation, wild adventures, wilderness adventures, and much of that library was donated to Hopkins. My grandmother was a typical middle-class woman of her era. She raised kids, supervised household stuff, was a member of volunteer groups, The baby's milk fund comes to mind. Intensive gardening activities. I remember groups of women making rolling bandages on the large dining room table for the Red Cross during World War II. And in 1950, they sold the house, the Ruxton House, and built a home on Gibson Island, where they spent many summers. So George Gale was the son of George Gale Jr., who was the Board of Fire Commissioners from 1903 to 1906. Does that mean anything to anyone? Yeah. The Great Baltimore Fire of 1904. So here he is, the father. And the grandfather, George Wilhelm Gale, was with Christian Axe, and they sold Gale and Axe cigarettes, and later sold the company in 1891 to the American Tobacco Company. I've got tons of information on the Gales, and I hope to get into more detail on my YouTube channel. Another family I want to highlight that I love are the Creightons. So here we have George Creighton and Margaret Patton Wilson. Here we standing outside of the house in 1922 or thereabouts with the daughter, Margaret. He came to Baltimore as assistant superintendent of Hess Steel Company, then was up to Pennsylvania for a while working on a dredging operation, sort of commuting back and forth between Pennsylvania and Baltimore. Was back permanently in Baltimore in 1928 and moved on to the Industrial Corporation of Baltimore, consulting with corporate heads about engineering problems and plant analysis. And so when World War II broke out, being in that field, he became the manager of war production, Maryland's manager of war production during World War II. And after the war, he became the head of Baltimore's Chamber of Commerce. He was the elder of the Second Presbyterian Church, and Margaret Wilson was also, she was a native of Indiana, PA, and also active in the Second Presbyterian Church, and a former president of its Women's Association. They were long timers. They were in the home for quite some time. Here we have the kids, Margaret and George, in front of the house, and then a car in front of that looks more like a 1930s vehicle. And just to read from Margaret Moser, these are her maternal grandparents. She said, my grandmother died when I was 24, my grandfather when I was 44, so I knew them well. I spent a lot of time on 3903 Cloverhill. When I was a child, I can still walk it through with my mind. I have a photo of my grandmother and her two children standing out in the corner. You saw that, which might interest you. What I remember was what their kitchen was like before it was renovated in 1950. I also remember on the third floor bedroom, there was a pencil sketch of a soldier done by a young workman who was about to be deployed in the army for World War I and had been covered when he was wallpapered. My goodness. The fella that drew the draw, my guess is this young workman was doing this in a lot of these homes. Pretty nifty. We've got the Dulfields, and he was the bank president of Canton Bank, head of the liquor board after the repeal of Prohibition, so that's a pretty good place to be. Chairman of the Government Efficiency and Economy, and a chairman of the Maryland Workshop for the Blind. And today they built a home out where on the present day Owings Mills. It's called near Soldier's Delight, and there's a lodge still that they built that's there. We've got the Winchester Whites, and I'm in contact with the granddaughter and hope to get some more information. But it's a great photo of them in Catonsville just prior to buying the home. You see some of these photos that are really like dark like this. These are passport photos. This is something better than nothing. Bernard Demkin, who ran the Boulevard Theater. I don't know if you guys know, they're on Greenmount and 32nd. There's the theater still there. So he was a theater manager. And we have Charles Mark Falconer, and his wife Ida Schumacher. He was in a stationery company and also the head of the Automotive Club of Maryland. Here we have Eleanor Mitchell Dieter and her wedding photo, married to Neville Leary, a bond broker. The Bouchers, this is Marie Alice Fornan. This is a great photo. There's a passport photo from when she was in World War I. She was a nurse at the in France at the McKay Roosevelt Base Hospital. And her husband was the secretary treasurer of the Star Shirt Company. And we've got, he also served in World War I. Milo Stevens Dillman and Sybil Dugan, he worked for the American Radiator Company. He was a little older when he came here, he was working at the head of the Chicago branch, and they transferred him to take over Baltimore. This is the only photo I can find. This is from his college yearbook. And we have Francis Edward Waters, who was the chairman of the State Council of Defense during World War I. So we have the World War II Production Board, head of State Council of Defense from World War I, and a distant relative of a current famous Waters from Baltimore. And this woman is something special. Louise Courtenay O'Donnell Finlay. These were great. When you found single women in homes, it really was intriguing what was going on here. She was the great-granddaughter of Columbus O'Donnell, a wealthy businessman in Baltimore. And in her time, she was considered a celebrity and known as the Belle of Baltimore. I got a lot about here, but I'll try to zip through. But I have to say, the fact that someone died in her house, a significantly younger man, Thomas Jenkins III, found dead in her home. And Jenkins had hurled silver pitchers through glass and cut the phone line so no one could call her by another young man guest of hers. So she had a lot going on, I think. And we're on to Laura Bolton Simmons Riley. She was a widower. We have some passport photos from her traveling. George Herbert Gregory, who was a sanitary engineer and Hopkins professor of civil and sanitary engineering. And then another favorite of mine, Benjamin Merrill Rhodes Hopkinson. You see his photo in the middle. This is his yearbook photo from the University of Maryland in 1883 from the School of Dentistry. I bought this on eBay. Someone ended up with boxes of photos from the University of Maryland. They were in North Carolina, and they were selling them photo by photo. I'm like, you gotta be kidding. Well, you have one of my first families. I want it. So here we are. Yours sincerely, Benjamin. And here he is later in life when he owned the home as a professor on the left. And what was really interesting is he was known not only for his work in dentistry, but he was a world famous, or I should say country famous, I don't know if he got out of the country, but a country famous tenor that traveled all across the United States giving concerts. And that's mentioned in his obituary. Prominent lawyer working for the chairman of the Judiciary Commission of Baltimore, judge of the Supreme Bench of Baltimore with his wife, Christine Dulaney. And Christine Dulaney in 1932 was the chairwoman of the Women's Special Committee for the Baltimore Relief Campaign and acted for many years in charitable philanthropic works. I'm not exactly sure. I have not time to look that up. I assume that's some sort of relief during the Great Depression. Guy Leonard, another wonderful story from a chemist from England who may have been brought over in some sort of government deal. Originally worked in Cumberland at a munitions or explosives factory. At the end of the war, bought a home and continued to do work and inventing and patenting. He married Fanny Baxter, who was in fact a other than Guy, but she had a philandering husband. This is in England. She had a philandering husband that left Fanny with 4 children. And he took that relationship on, and his current relatives in England say that, you know, he must have been a very kind man to marry Fanny, an older divorcee, and her life must have greatly improved as a result. I mention that, not that it's an important data, but to know that there are people today thinking about these people. I've been in touch with the daughter-in-law of Lawrence Naylor, so I don't quite have more information about him. He was in finance. And we've got Sally Hoxton Randolph and Sons passport photos. The husband was an insurance agent. David Rockwell Millard was a pharmacist. He was a Quaker and treasurer and secretary and chairman of the State Board of Pharmacy Commissioners. And William Mueller, who was manager of a tobacco company and later became the president of Wyman Park Federal Savings and Loan. And the Kennys, and here's Marie Elizabeth Wagner. And I gotta love the Georges because this is Lillian I. Kelly. Remember Rita Hammond Kelly of 3914, Malcolm's wife? Well, this is this is Rita's sister. There were 3 people from the same family in my neighborhood. My house, James, the father, over on 39th Street, and Lillian here over on Canterbury. And we have photos of Lillian's daughter, Anne, And Anne was the same age as first baby of my family, Elizabeth. So Anne and Elizabeth played a lot together. I'll tell you, when you start researching these people, it's sort of when you find good things, it makes you happy. When you find sad things, it's not so much. Stephen Lee George owned a wholesale auto parts company, and he committed suicide in 1929 due to problems with the business. And I was just so deflated when I found that out. Again, I don't know the particulars of it, but we are heading into depression territory, although 29 could be soon. All right. Are we okay? Can I try to rush through a couple more people? I'm going to do that. I don't have a photo for Antonio Skopinich or Lillian Hopkins Patterson, but my neighbor Sudeepa Sakar worked with me to pull this one together, and we got some great information, so I want to talk about this. Here we have the deed from 1922. And we start looking at the census, and we find Antonio Skopinich and the family. He's director. He's working for Columbia Specialties. And we start looking to that. We start building his family tree. And we say, oh, he's working there at Columbia Specialties. It's a can company. He becomes the secretary of the company. We find his wedding to Lillian. This is great information. We start building Lillian's family and figuring out how she fits into things. And then we find this interesting note. He was the aide in the class march for McDonough School's 50th anniversary jubilee in 1923. Oh my goodness. And on his death, the McDonough Alumni Association announced their condolences. This was an important person to McDonough, or McDonough was important to him, or both ways. That led us to Christine Amadori, the archivist and special collection conservator at McDonough, to see what she could turn up, and she knocked it out of the park. We start getting Antonio's class grades and activities in 1892, and scrapbooks that the schools are keeping following Antonio throughout the years and what he's up to and what his businesses are. And you can see references here to his home on Cloverhill and that he's at Columbia Specialty. And we find a wedding invitation still on file for Antonio's wedding. And letters that he was writing the Alumni Association. It looks like they were looking for someone that understands typing. Please send them on. And speeches about them. And I will say this. From that, Sudeepa hunted down Maureen Larkin, whose mother was an uncle of Antonio, and she a lot of this was news to her. And she said, well, mother was the oldest child, and Tony. He was fatherless by the time he went to school, and she believes that McDonough educated him for free, or at least at a reduced rate. And her mother helped out when he got older because they did not have any kids, and told some anecdotes about Antonio. So some great information there that it's all around us. You just don't know. So Marshall O'Pettit, first owner who ended up buying a property of farmland that belonged to George Washington. Not that this was particularly interesting, but as I'm going through, I'm like, okay, in the Pettit's home in 3950 Cloverhill, we have the estranged husband of one of the servants showing up and shooting Maddie Butler dead, throwing the gun in the bushes and running away. Let me pause here and say, finding information about the African-American community is harder. Finding information about non-affluent people is harder. I don't want to make this look easy. We're in what was a relatively affluent neighborhood. But, okay, we've got a couple here that was involved in a murder. We should be able to find something out. We start Googling them, and oh my goodness, the Butlers were involved in a shootout with dry agents during Prohibition, and you got a car full of 5 people. And neither the Butlers nor the dry agents said that anyone pulled out a gun, even though there were shots fired. So something funny going on. But we got these people. Let's try to build a tree. And I've had an amazing amount of information about the Butlers. But then when you go and look for ancestry hints, it fell flat. They're giving me the Butlers in Alabama. No. So something to keep in mind. Ancestry is only as good as the data it has, and that's where, trying to look for some of these marginalized communities on ancestry is going to be harder. But there's information. I knew when she was died. I was able to go look up the death records, and here we have Maddie Butler dying in 1927 during the murder. I've got the death record. If I can go get that record, I can find more about her. I've been too busy to make my way down to Annapolis. Someone will correct me right later. And down to, and but I'm sure that with a death record, I'll be able to go a little farther with this. We have Luther Emmert Holt Jr. and his wife Olivia Caldwell. Great couple. His father, it was the authority and founder of North American Pediatrics, author of The Care and Feeding of Children. He was the sort of, the Dr. Spock of his era. And his son took over that sort of job and did a new edition of the book, did a lot of research with Hopkins, did research on different diseases, childhood diseases, and started a children's clinic in Belleville, New York. Olivia was a wonderful character. She attended Vassar and Barnard colleges and was magazine editor for Breezy Stories in the 1920s before getting married. But even after marriage, she stayed active. In 1933 alone, she was one of the founders of the Foreign Policy Association and chairman of the Maryland Committee on the Causes and Cures of War. I think these were all from the Maryland League of Voters. Chairman of International Relations from the Maryland League of Women Voters. Member of the board of Happy Hills Homes for Convalescent Children, the Baby's Milk Fund, which we heard about earlier, and the Playground Athletic League. During World War II, she was the vice chairman and Division of War Savings of the American Women's Volunteer Services. And here we have a photo of her with the stylish cap from World War II. So, a lot out there, a lot of wonderful people. I'm not going to get into too much detail. Laura B. Cooper is the one that I don't have firm confirmation of, because all I have is a single woman and her name that led me to say, who is she? Well, I know she bought the home. I know she sold the home. I know from the deed she was single when she sold the home. Then we start looking in directories. Who are the Coopers out there? There were only like so many Laura Coopers. I have 3 in 1917. So we start making a list. Who are all these Laura Coopers? Well, most of them are married, so that eliminates them. There's a Laura Cooper without a middle initial from 17, and one from Druid Hill with no other clues. But in 1910, we have a Laura J and Laura B. And if we look in Laura B, in 1910, in 1920, at the age of 38, she's still single. This is sort of a good candidate. And we start following her at the Washington College of Law, and we find out that she is from Baltimore and has a father who's John Cooper, the head of the Pilots Association and inspector of steam vessels. And she's the only woman from Baltimore at the time admitted to argue before the United States Supreme Court. And we have an address at 3037, and we have a photo of Miss Cooper, and we build a tree, and we know that she's in the Maryland VP of Women's Lawyers Association, and she continues to list that 3037 St. Paul address. Oh dear, she's not the one from Cloverhill, but we can find evidence that in fact they sold that home in 1920. So they sold the home in 1920. She got into her home and Cloverhill in 22. This is a good candidate. I do not have definitive proof, but the dates suggest the possibility. And if she didn't go to Cloverhill, where did she go? But I'm not going to stake my reputation on it. This is the shakiest case I have. Every other case is rock solid. And you can do this with not only people, but companies. I told you the Hudson Cement Company that made the bricks for our homes. Well, who are they? Well, here we have the president, Samuel Vervallen. Let's build his family tree. Oh, and he traces up to Richard Vervallen, the inventor of the first automatic brick machine from Haverstraw, New York on the Hudson. Well, hence the name. And that traces to Henry Vervallen III, who's still in Baltimore. This guy's family built our homes. He's here somewhere. We're all here somewhere. We walk around and we bump into so many inanimate objects and people and links to the people that lived in there and built these things. And as the expression goes, you're probably inhaling air from Julius Caesar's last gasp in AD 44. And we're all walking in the footsteps of Malcolm T. and Rita K. Douglas, or Antonio Skopinich, or Benjamin Merrill Hopkinson's, and we don't even know it. But with a little tenacity and some spare time in the evening, you can do this. There's a good chance you can figure out who's walking around in your house. And I know you probably didn't get enough, or the pace was too frenetic. So please be on the lookout. You'll be able to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And I will end with the slide about providing funds for periodicals at the VLP. And I will cede the floor and hope that you're still here and not exhausted.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. That was fascinating. And I know that it took you more than a few hours in the evening to accomplish all that research. It's incredible. We've got some questions. And one of the questions is, were there restrictive covenants in this neighborhood, like in Roland Park, Guilford, and Homeland?
Absolutely. Absolutely. African Americans could not buy homes. They could live in as servants. That was specified that they could be servants. And there were some number of servants that I found in census data, but I've had very little luck tracing their families because you got one name. Really, you want to sort of corroborate by having two names and going from there. But yes, there were restrictive covenants. One of the other covenants, of course, is that we could not have live pork, pig here. Someone was talking about their neighbors having chickens. There's nothing about chickens, so I suppose we could have chickens, but you can't have pigs here. I don't mean to make light of covenants. They're nasty, nasty things. And yes, George Morris, he was a brilliant man, but he was also involved in some very nasty real estate practices. He was the head of the real estate board at the time. You saw how much of a promoter was. He also built Ashburton. He built a lot of apartment buildings, and he eventually, the Baltimore Jewish Committee had him yanked from a consultative job he had with the city because of his practices. He protested that was what was done throughout the industry and that it wasn't fair. But of course, the outcome is that they did pull him from that position, and so that was pretty tough for him.
So just to tell everybody, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat. It will come to me, and then I'll ask Josh, and that just kind of controls the questioning. A question about Morris: was he both a developer, architect, and a builder, or did he specialize in one of those? And then also, was Charles Steffi the real estate agent?
No, I don't think, I have no proof that Charles Steffi was the real estate agent. He just had in his scrapbook things that he found interesting. But I can't say for certain. I don't know that.
And what about the architect?
Yes, he was the architect businessman. So they were his plans. I don't have the plans. What we have are from those magazines with the drawings. And, builder in the sense that he's sort of a general contractor. This is a fairly large operation, and he employed a good number of people. And he was involved in lots of projects, so I don't think he was out there swinging a hammer per se.
Right. Joanne Smith says, yes, he was developer, architect, and a builder, and then later he just managed the properties.
Can I stop here and say Joanne Smith is George Morris's granddaughter? She's joined us. She is I need to say this live because I know you're going to record it. She is a wonderful person. I can't believe she sent me that ideally furnished home. She had to take the staples out of it to scan it. And thank you so much for joining us, Joanne. And thank you. It's wonderful that you're here. And let me assert, your grandfather was brilliant. And I know more about him, not just from this neighborhood, but other projects that he was involved in. He was a sharp guy. Please.
So Noah, we've got some questions about your research methods. So did you look into the records of the Maryland Daily Record, and do you have a source for finding the archives of that for free? We'd all love that.
No, look, my kids just turned 7 and 4. I started really working on this somewhere around 2016. The kids were, not, they're still a handful. So I had to do as much as I could do of what was online. And newspapers.com was the best source for the most periodicals, but no, I've not found
The Daily Record. Yeah. And how, when you found that photo on eBay, how did you search for that? Are you just putting the names of the people into eBay?
That may have been a Google search. So I'm searching Ancestry, which has a lot of databases, and I'm also searching newspapers for any sort of clippings, and I'm also searching Google. And I think certain listings, if they're up there long enough, end up in Google. So that's my best guess, is that I found
So Google. So start with Google and then see where it leads you.
Yeah, an odd find.
Another person says once you saw that very first one where you realized it was the ground rent that was changing hands. Charlene Clark asks, how did you get past the ground rent person on the deed? I didn't catch your explanation.
In this particular case, it never separated. Or if it separated, I somehow ended up, I was, let me say that again. I was tracing from the home deed originally. So I never went down the branch of the ground rent branch. That's happened to me elsewhere where that gets you lost. That did not happen here. I just saw the multiple transfers where they're splitting it, but I didn't go down a false path. But that's happened to me, and that's where the block books solve that problem.
Yeah, and are the block books, those are digitized too?
Yes, and that's also Maryland Land Rec.
So here's some more. So one person asked, can you repeat the database for deeds by folio lot block? And that's Maryland Land. Yeah. I don't know if we can put that in the chat. Maybe you could put that in the chat for everybody.
Yeah, so the first one was SDAT was the very first place I looked. It's sdat.gov or something like that. Let me.
Yeah, I think the question is do you need a subscription? I think you don't need a subscription, but you do have to register. Like you send them your email and they'll send you an email back, or it used to be that way.
SDAT is free, but that only gets you the latest deed. MD Land Rec is also free, but you need to register.
Right.
You just need to sign up and they send you credentials.
So here's some content ones about the neighborhood. The pharmacist Millard, was he affiliated with the drugstore Morgan and Millard?
That sounds right. I got so many facts buzzing in my mind right now, but that sounds like it could be right, and I can double check, but that rings a bell.
And then another one about street names. Ash Avenue became Canterbury Road at the start of the development, and I've seen maps where it was labeled Oak Street. Was that before it became Ash Avenue?
No, it was Ash first. It became Oak, and then by decree of Mayor Preston, it was changed to Canterbury. And Highfield, which is on the other extreme, that, oh dear, that was on there as, that was something that then went to Mallory. That's also had 3 names. I'd have to look at that slide.
And this same Jillian Storms asked another question. Why were the large homes on Charles Street so willing to give up their backyards to a big development? Did they know Morris was massing the land? Or was it one? Go ahead.
I don't know. I know that the first person, George Hyde, by the time he purchased it, he was much older in age. It's possible it was time for a downsize. I don't know. I've not really gone that deep. Eileen Hyam's book is probably a better source for that. I know she spends a good amount of time talking about the estates that were there. I don't recall her talking about the motivations for the sale, but she does talk about that a little bit.
Any other questions? It says, Polly Morrison says, I'm looking for my great uncle Charles Kirchner, Kerchner, who lived on Clover Hill. But maybe it wasn't one of the first families.
Kirchners, yeah. That, hold on a second. Give me 1 second and I can, in fact, that may be in my presentation. All right. Can I do a screen share again?
Oh, yeah, I think you can. Let me see. You should be able to.
Okay. Charles F. Kirchner, coal broker, 3911 Clover Hill, born 1891, 26 at the age, Helen Eleanor Blair. Yes, they're the Kirchners, and I have a family tree somewhere. On it. Of course, all of this stuff is on Ancestry, and so I have the Kirchners family tree there as well. I guess I could show you right quick, if possibly. What did I say, 3911? Yeah, I've not gone very far with them, but this is Charles. And I've got census, World War I, draft card. So there he is. What was the relation again? Oh,
Great
okay.
uncle.
Yep, there you go. Ping me and I can send you a link to the tree. Unless you have more, you probably have more information than I do.
That's great. You are also a model of organization here with all the way that you've got those family trees organized too.
I'm the least organized person you'll meet, but thank you.
I don't think that's true. So Jillian Storms asks, the image selling the development that, was everywhere, prominently displayed the Tudor apartment building, Canterbury Hall at the corner of 39th and Canterbury Road, designed by Glidden and Fritz. Was there any relationship between these projects?
Wait. Canterbury Hall, oh, designed by, that was a Morris project though.
Oh, so the same developer, architect.
So George Morris built Canterbury Hall, and George Morris lived on Canterbury, or at the time Oak. So where Canterbury meets University, where the hotel is now, that was, Morris's were there. And then later on when the project was done, he moved, and Joanne knows me better than I do, into Guilford.
Great, thank you. So I think that might be the end of the questions. Mike, let's see.
I had disciplined, I had muted myself. I'd like to thank Josh for just a great presentation. You see why I was very pleased to wait 2 years, I think it was, before we could get him. I'd like to thank everybody here who came. I know from the responses, a lot of you are from the Canterbury, Tuscany neighborhood, and others are from all over the place, including the suburbs. I hope you'll be with us next month on the third Thursday of the month, which will probably be our final one of the season. This year we will only have 5 evenings rather than 6 because we had to cancel the March one. But that last one is scheduled to be on a project that's going on to memorialize the slave trade and to put markers on sites that were significant to the slave trade. One of our board members, Jerome Gray, is working on that. So I invite you all to be with us. If the Village Learning Place contribution thing flashed by too fast for you to take a note, just look it up. You're all researchers now. This is an easy research. Go to Google or whatever, DuckDuck or whatever you want, and type in Village Learning Place, and you'll be able to find out how to, contribute your $10 or even more than that if you want. You can do more than that. You can follow the activities of the Baltimore City Historical Society in 2 ways. We have a Facebook page. It's just Baltimore History. We'd love you to have you members. And then there is also our web page. And I always have got it's a favorite of mine, so I don't know the actual address. Chris Whitaker, can I unmute you? Where'd you go, Chris?
We put the Baltimore Historical Society address in chat earlier that people should be able to get. Great.
So
then I'm putting the Village Learning Place one up right now.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, I think, unless anyone else has anything more to say, we can close the meeting with our great gratitude for you coming here. And thank you, Josh. Josh was the thing that brought us all together, but it wouldn't have been a presentation if you weren't here. So thank you all for being here and making this possible. And thank you, Josh. We look forward to your continuing work. And just thank you for this window into Baltimore history that you've opened up. And one of the things I particularly like, that sense of connection. These folks who bought these original properties are dead and gone, but aspects of their life lives on in the continuing life of the community, just as ours will. So thank you all very much for being here. And as they said, and to all, a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Good night.